Good morning or afternoon if you're watching this later in the day. My name's Anthony.
I'm Stacy.
And we are so excited that you're joining us online today. And Stace, we got something coming up next week that you want to know about.
It's true. So in just a few days maybe from now, but Sunday, May 12th is Mother's Day. And we do some fun things here at the church because everyone might love Mother's Day in your house or they might not. But something we deeply believe in is doing something that's outside of these walls on Mother's Day. So we do this incredible thing where we invite you to either send in, bring in, ship in, deliver in diapers for families in this community that are not able to purchase some on their own. They're not able to make a decision between food and diapers. And we don't want to have families that we care about in this community, which is all of them, having to make that decision. So you are so incredibly generous every year. Any size is good. You can, but you can also deliver them here to the church office during the week or bring them on Sunday morning. Thank you in advance for whatever you send it.
You are such a generous church. And again, if you want to figure out like easy way to ship it to us, you go to reallife.la/diapers. Yep. Or if you just want to give to support the ministries we're up to, reallife.la/give. We're able to do what we do in our community to serve the world around us through your generosity. So thanks for being that kind of a church. We're going to get out of the way. Pastor Jim has a great message for you today as we continue to journey through the Sermon on the Mount. We will see you right after.
Hey, Real Life Church, it's Pastor Jim. God bless you. It's good to be with you again this week. Thanks to all of you who came to our concert last weekend. We had a fabulous concert out on the lawn. Dozens of people who are new to our church showed up. We had a great barbecue and great music. So thanks to all of you who came and invited. Who would have known that ABBA had so many more good songs than just Take On Me? It was a good night. It was a good night for all. Anyway, and don't forget this coming Sunday is Mother's Day. Run out and get your cards and flowers and such. And we celebrate moms here at Real Life, but also if mom's not with you, bring diapers. We give diapers out to moms who are in need in some women's shelters. And so it's a great way to care for other people's moms this coming weekend. All right, today we're going to dive back into our series of teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, which remember is Jesus laying out his constitution for the new kingdom that he is building. And we're going to notice today, we're going to hone in on one particular theme that runs through the Sermon on the Mount, which is that we are to let go of the kingdoms of this world. So you remember he's told us, let go of revenge, let go of trying to settle scores and get even with people, let go of your anxiety about material goods in this world. Live wholly into the kingdom of heaven and let go of the kingdoms of the earth. And we're going to see him take a new angle on that today. As we dive into our study, let's pray. Jesus, thank you for calling us out of this world into your kingdom. Thank you that our lives and everything we have belongs to you. Thank you that you forgive the brokenness in our lives and call us to so much better. So help us to keep our eyes on you and your kingdom. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, we are in Matthew chapter 7 today, starting at verse 1. This is Jesus speaking. Listen to God's word. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, measuring in the ancient Middle Eastern world was of great significance. This was a big ethical issue because it was tied to economics and survival. When you went to buy things in the marketplace, the economic system that was used involved a balancing scale, and money was often valued on how much it weighed. There's actually records of people shaving silver off of coins in the ancient world to try to steal some of the silver away and still get away by treating the coin as though it had the same value. And if a merchant was unjust, they would use one set of weights on the scale for their friends and a different set of weights on the scale for strangers. They'd benefit themselves and their own family and make sure that they charged others more. And so this was an ethical issue. You may read this in the scriptures. You may read Jesus saying, whatever measure you use will be measured to you, and think, well, that's kind of poetic, but who cares? Well, no. This was a major ethical issue in their day. This would be like hacking or scamming, right? It's an ethical issue tied to economics. Imagine going to the ATM and you go to take cash out, and the ATM decides to give you how much money based on what it thinks about you. You know, the artificial intelligence in there looks through the camera and decides how spiffy you are and gives you how much money, not based on what's in your account, but on how much it thinks you should have. Well, that would be a terrible ATM. That would be totally unjust. Well, in the ancient world, the merchants, if they were unjust, could switch the weights on their scale and charge more to some people than they would to others. Imagine going to the grocery store and the person in front of you is buying a gallon of milk and that's $5, and then you get up to the front of the line and they tell you a gallon of milk is $6, and you just saw them charge a different amount to somebody else. You would feel like the only just thing was for you to be able to use the same measures against the cashier. When they go to buy groceries, you get to use their unjust scale against them. And that's what Jesus says is going to happen. Whatever measure you use is going to be used against you or for you. So make sure you use just scales. And this theme runs throughout the scriptures from one end to the other. You'll come to this over and over again. And again, to the modern reader, it feels strange. Why are we reading about scales? Why is this so important? But over and over again. In Leviticus 19, God commands his people to use just scales. In Proverbs 11, it says, unjust scales are an abomination to the Lord, and just scales are his delight. And in Amos chapter 8, it says that because of your unjust scales, I will turn your festivals into mourning. God says, because you have used unjust scales, I will literally be a party pooper. Right? And so it's a big deal. And often God's judgment of humanity is compared to a scale in which our righteousness is weighed. So that's the context of the ancient world. Now, look at the context of this teaching in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, the center of the Sermon on the Mount is the Lord's Prayer. And the anchor verse of the Lord's Prayer is, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so this whole prayer, this whole sermon is about God's kingdom taking shape on the earth. And one of the most significant signs of God's kingdom taking root in our hearts is that we let go of the world. After the end of the Lord's Prayer, Jesus will double back to the hardest line in the prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And he'll repeat at the end, because if you don't forgive other people, you won't be forgiven. In the same way you forgive, you will be forgiven. And here that teaching is again. And remember when he says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, a first century Jewish person would have thought of the year of Jubilee. The every 50th year when all debts are canceled, all property goes back to its original owner, all servants are set free, every debt is canceled every 50th year in the Jewish culture. And Jesus is saying, now that I have arrived, I declare Jubilee. If you turn to Jesus and follow Jesus, all debts are canceled. You are absolutely forgiven because of the cross of Jesus. And in the same way, Jubilee only works if everybody is in. You forgive the debts of everybody else. If you won't forgive their debts, your debt's not going to be forgiven. And that's the context of the Sermon on the Mount. Elsewhere, Jesus will say, what you bind on earth, you bind in heaven. And what you loose on earth, you loose in heaven. Whatever scales you set here are the ones that are going to be used when you stand in front of God on that day. This fits in perfectly with the context of all of Jesus' teachings. Jesus teaches over and over again that you should forgive the way you want to be forgiven. He tells a parable about a man who owes a great debt, and the man's debt is forgiven. And then he rushes out and finds someone who owes him a little bit of money and virtually strangles the guy to get it back. And the parable concludes that guy's going to be condemned because he was forgiven a great amount, but he held somebody else's small debt up despite the fact that he had been forgiven. And Jesus says that's the way it's going to be in my kingdom. If you want to be forgiven, you have to forgive. If you won't forgive, I'll hold the same standard against you. So you know that grudge you've been holding against somebody because they really wronged you? You know that resentment that you always feel and think of when you see that person? Are you sure you want to hold on to it? You and I were forgiven when we were in open rebellion against the kingdom of heaven. Remember, God in the flesh died in our hands, and yet he was dying for us. Are you sure that grudge is worth keeping? Or is it time to forgive? Jesus goes on in verse 3. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, then all the time there's a plank in your eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I like this little verse in the Sermon on the Mount, this little passage, because Jesus was a carpenter's son. And so I entertain the possibility that this was Joseph's contribution to the Sermon on the Mount. That when Jesus was a little boy, this was a lesson that his father taught him. Maybe in the workshop, holding up a big block to his own eye and saying, here, son, let me get the dust out of your eye. He says, it doesn't work, does it? So don't do that to other people. Maybe this is a memory from Jesus' childhood. The teaching here is that you don't want an eye surgeon with blurry vision. That's not going to work. The eye surgeon has to clear out his own eyes to see clearly first. And in the same way, you and I have to make sure that our lives are in a good place when we go to help someone else seek righteousness. Because if our eyes are not in a good place, we're going to go at them with judgment and fury instead of grace and love. And if we actually want to redeem someone else, the goal can't be to throw rocks at them. The goal's got to be to help them. And to do that, our hearts have to be in the right place first. Now, it doesn't say that we're going to turn a blind eye on people who are untrustworthy. Later on in this chapter, Jesus will say, beware of false disciples, beware of false teachers. It doesn't say turn a blind eye on all that stuff. It just says, hold up the same scale to other people that you would hold up to yourself. You're going to be judged in the same way you judge. So choose wisely. And I cannot think of a better teaching for the year 2024. Because in our culture today, in this election year, we have become absolutely tribal. Tribalism is when you defend your own team no matter what they do, whether they're right or wrong, because you feel like the other teams, the other tribes are such a threat to you. It doesn't matter what your own tribe does. Anything to survive is fine. Anything that helps you win is passable. And maybe you can deal with your own tribe's sins after you've driven away all the other tribes. But in the meantime, you turn a blind eye on the wrongs of your own tribe and spend all the time fighting against the others. There's a professor of philosophy named Alan Buchanan who describes tribalism this way. He says, with tribalism, you regard those you disagree with as not just wrong, but as either incorrigibly stupid and misinformed, or irredeemably corrupt, insincere, and even evil. You disregard the content of the person's views because you dismiss the person as not worthy of being listened to or engaged with. The problem with American culture today, particularly as it surrounds politics, is we've forgotten how to disagree without demonizing. The tribalism is the most animalistic, childish, base kind of ethic. It is an absolute rejection of the way and teachings of Jesus, and it is a sin. And Republicans and Democrats today are both completely tribalistic and would happily turn the American culture tribalistic. We've forgotten how to disagree without demonizing. We've forgotten how to love truth enough to talk about things on which we disagree, but to love heaven enough to seek to redeem the people we disagree with. We're far too eager to throw rocks at them. And the only one who wins when we all demonize each other is the king of demons himself. Satan wins when we all view each other as demons and divide and attack. He's the one who relishes all that. Jesus says, in my kingdom, you've been given great grace. When you were in open rebellion against the kingdom of heaven, I died for you. Now you forgive and you treat gracefully. And you deal with the mess that's in your own eye before you go around trying to tell anybody else how to take care of theirs, so that when you do go to help them, you do so from a spirit of love. and not a spirit of judgment. This is what Jesus and his Sermon on the Mount have to say into the year 2024. Stop judging each other. Stop trying to cancel each other. Forgive the way you would want to be forgiven, because that's what's going to happen. Forgive the way you have been forgiven. I died to show you grace. Love truth enough to disagree, but love heaven enough not to demonize. And then there's a little passage here at the end, verse 6, and it's a strange one, but we'll unpack it. Jesus says, "Do not give to dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet. They may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." That's an odd one. It's hard to understand what that means and how it relates to anything that's been said so far. Sometimes when you come to a verse in the scriptures that you don't understand, the best thing to do is to look at the breadth of scriptures and see if the same idea appears anywhere else. And sure enough, that is the case. In the book of Proverbs, it says that as a dog returns to its own vomit, so a fool returns to his own folly. Right? A foolish person goes back to the things that were bad for it in the first place, even after he's expelled them. And then in 2 Peter, Peter picks up that image again and pairs dogs with pigs and says, in the same way a dog goes back to its own vomit, a pig, once it has been washed clean, goes back and plays in the mud again. Now, I don't know who's out there bathing pigs. That doesn't seem like a fruitful activity. But trust me, if you bathe a pig, it's going to go back and roll in the mud again. So in other words, if there's sin in your life that you haven't dealt with, the gospel is going to be wasted on you, because you're going to go back and return to your sin again. You're going to go wallow in your sin. And your attempts to help someone else in their life is just going to turn out to be a mess, because your own sin is going to clog your vision. Right? Jesus says, first, address your own righteousness and your own brokenness. Deal with yourself. And only then are you in a position to say to someone else, hey, maybe I can help. If you've never been in a small group with other Christians, a small group Bible study, it's a group of 8 or 10 people who get together every week or two, and they have a good meal together often, and they'll read the Bible and talk about it. And it's only in that context of community, where we seek to love one another, where we seek to grow together, that we're able to help one another pursue the kind of righteousness that Jesus wants from all of us. And we do it together in a spirit of love, because that's what Jesus is envisioning in this teaching. Now, you can read this all as commands, because they are. Don't judge. But in every one of Jesus' commands, there's also a beautiful promise. And the promise is this: when you go following after Jesus, when you live into his kingdom, not only are you told not to judge, but you're invited into a world in which you will not be judged. You'll be invited into a world, into a community where when you make mistakes, people treat you gracefully instead of picking up rocks to throw at you. And that community is what the church is supposed to be. The church is supposed to be that reflection of the kingdom of heaven, the place where heaven touches down on the earth and begins to take shape in our lives and in our community and through us to the world. The church is supposed to be that place where we model the kind of grace that we have received and that we want to receive. And the promise is this: if you accept the calling to this kingdom, you get to be a part of a community where you are given great grace. As usual, the Christian writer C.S. Lewis says this far better and more briefly than I have, and I'm going to read how he describes it in his sermon, The Weight of Glory. I've saved this till the end of the sermon, because if I read it first, I would have had nothing else to say, and my sermon would have been much shorter. But now I'll get to Lewis's recap that's said much better than I could have. Lewis writes, "As regards to my own sins, it's a safe bet, though not a certainty, that excuses are not really so good as I think. The excuses I make for my own sins, probably not all that good. As regards to other men's sins against me, it's a safe bet, though not a certainty, that the excuses are better than I think. They may have a reason why they did what they did that I don't entirely know about. One must therefore begin by attending to everything which may show that the other man was not so much to blame as we thought. In other words, give other people the benefit of the doubt. But even if he is absolutely fully to blame, we still have to forgive him. And even if 99% of his apparent guilt can be explained away by really good excuses, The problem of forgiveness begins with the 1% of guilt which is left over. To excuse what can produce really good excuses is not Christian charity, it's only fairness. To be Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. This is hard. It is perhaps not so hard to forgive a single great injury, but to forgive the incessant provocations of daily life, to keep on forgiving the bossy mother-in-law, the bullying husband, the nagging wife, the selfish daughter, the deceitful son. How can we do it? Only, I think, by remembering where we stand. By meaning our words when we say our prayers each night, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. We are offered forgiveness on no other terms. To refuse it is to refuse God's mercy for ourselves. There is no hint of exceptions, and God means exactly what He says. So let's live into a community of grace. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Jim, for sharing that word with us today.
And thank you for joining us. It was great to spend this time with you online. If you need anything as you go about your life and you're like, gosh, I'm in need, our church is here to help. Just send us an email at info@reallife.la and we will be there to support those needs.
Yes, and also please know that you are loved, you're being prayed for and cheered for. Have a great week. We will see you next time.